This is turn 34 of Degeneracy, and we have started fighting Agartha once again. Most of our battles are still raiding against Atlantis and Mictlan, and continuing to finish our conquest of Jomin. Here in the Old Land, we just raid a province with skeleton spam and some ghostly frontline. Here in Anramark, Atlantis recaptures an indie province with crossbows and snow warriors. We've actually taken control of Black Peaks with no opposition because Jomin didn't even put on one province defense. While the one province defense wouldn't have cost any losses, it's often helpful to do that just so that you can see the enemy's composition, and Jomin doesn't get that benefit here. Lucky Lake is similarly just capturing a province with a little bit of province defense. Here in Lake Eternal, we actually run into some of these Atlantean infantries, and while the fight is incredibly one-sided, we may as well take a look at it just to show just how poorly the Atlantean infantry stack up against our ghosts. So, because our ghosts are fully amphibious, they suffer no attack and defense penalties when fighting underwater, and because their weapons are piercing, they don't have an attack penalty bonus either. Additionally, spectral javelins actually are capable of firing underwater, because they're magic weapons. So that means that we actually have ranged attacks, and our enemies here do not. So it's a very, very one-sided fight, and we managed to kill those Atlantean infantry very quickly. They don't have particularly impressive magic resistance, and they also don't have magic weapons, unlike the snow troops. So definitely a one-sided fight there. Here in Ungvaloth, Mictlan just retakes one of our provinces, which did not have very much province defense, and he just kills a couple of guys who had retreated to there earlier. Here in Peskin, this is Agartha's attack against us, and while it is only fighting province defense, it's still worth looking at it just to see the composition of his army and the way that his troops are arranged. So he's using Flame Barrel Nightmares, which explode on death. That's basically all that they're meant to do. They're kind of just like a roaming bomb. I actually dislike using them because I much prefer using elementals, who can actually deal much more damage over the course of a fight than the Flame Barrel Nightmare will do with its one explosion. The only advantage to doing this is this lets you get a bunch all at once and not use any mage fatigue. But because they're one-time use anyways with regards to their explosion, it's usually worth just summoning a fire elemental in combat instead, unless you have a glut of gems and a dearth of mages. You can see here that Agartha has no trouble actually bringing a large number of mages to bear, but it looks like what he's using here is mostly just these Chthonian reanimators, so these guys can spam skeletons, but they're not going to be doing the same sort of elemental stuff that an alchemist would. He has two different boxes of crossbows here. Because they're both arranged in boxes, they are susceptible to fire archer stuff, and because he even has a mage in this one, there's definitely a strong chance of stuff going wrong. Some of Agartha's crossbows are actually fairly resilient because they have 17 protection, so they can actually hold up fairly well against enemy ranged fire. But these guys here are not particularly resilient at all, with only 7 protection, as are these guys right over here. So because these guys are all grouped up together, they can definitely get shot down. So it looks like what he's going to be doing is just spamming out skeletons, and we'll see that right over here. And he's using this Sacred stack set to and Heavy Infantry stack set to hold an attack, with the idea being that the skeletons are going to filter forward. However, because these guys are fully occupying their squares, the skeletons can only sort of slip through the cracks, like he didn't leave a proper lane for them, so they're going to be bunching up around their troops. What that means is that only a relatively small number of skeletons are going to be able to creep forward, and many of them are only going to be able to get into the fight after the Heavy Infantry have already engaged. And then here he's using these guys, the Iron Corpses, which we'd taken a look at earlier. And they're not particularly scary as far as undead units go, just because they have such low magic resistance. If I were a living nation, then banishment spam could be able to get rid of them relatively easily, and in my case, because my ghosts use magic resistance negates weapons, they'll be able to at least land hits reliably on them. Additionally, because of their low attack and defense score, they're not going to be hitting particularly often, in spite of the fact that they have a very high attack density. Additionally, many of them come with afflictions just from being summoned, which means that their decent starting attacks are liable to be lower in practice. So, yeah, I mean, it's a very straightforward script, just relying on lots of Horde of Skeleton spam and lots of crossbows, and we should actually be able to do a huge amount of damage to these very densely packed infantry and densely packed crossbows with Shadow Blasts. Additionally, we might be able to rout these armies, given that the mages don't have particularly impressive morale, using Wailing Winds. And if we get enough fear stuff going with the front line, then these guys might rout, which will make them essentially stop fighting, even as they get stuck on the skeletons. And then, because the skeletons themselves are stuck behind the infantry for the most part, we're not going to be basically completely surrounded, even if we are outnumbered by the mixture of skeletons and infantry. The large number of crossbows is at least somewhat threatening, and these guys can at least clear out squares of ghosts when they explode, but it's much less threatening than a more elemental mage supported army would be. And then this is, again, just a raiding party, just relying on skeleton spam to beat a small amount of province defense. The same is true here, although this one is bringing a fair number of additional ghosts. Here we are raiding, and we actually do run into these Jaguar Warriors, but given that there's relatively few of them, and I think they're even unblessed, and given that we actually have some crossbow support on our side, this is not too difficult of a fight. And let's see here, yeah, so the Tribal King is not a prophet or anything, so these guys are just going to run forward. They're going to be hitting these dispossessed spirits first, which will allow them to retain the seal shots, while these guys launch their javelins and the crossbows fly overhead. Given that these guys do not have any magical attacks, they, in their one round of combat, they don't manage to land enough hits to even kill any of my ghosts, so I'm able to clean that up very easily. This is Atlantis' army finally getting on top of my fortress, but again, I'm not particularly worried about it just on account of the fact that it's starving. We had already seen last turn that a number of these troops were already starving, and we can once again see that here, that some of these guys, given that they're starving, they have this terrible morale penalty, and many of them are going to be getting diseased as well. And then the diseased guys are going to lose HP and gain afflictions over time. I have a small amount of province defense here, and given that this is one of my 4th province defenses, I'll go. Nothing particularly threatening to his sacred infantry, but he even does manage to actually lose a few. So I just wanted to watch the battle, see how. Okay, yeah, that's friendly fire from the crossbows. Because his guys don't have shields, when the crossbows land among them, they do take some hits. And then here, this is Mictlan retaking one of my provinces just by using a big stack of his amphibious sacreds. In Berman Heights, we have an unpleasant event, but this is just brigands attacking my province, and Lemurian province defense is very strong. You can also tell from the event list that the attack didn't succeed, because otherwise it would have shown a gray flag for where the event took place. Brigands are just, low morale, villainous shortbow guys. So once they get in range of the Fear Aura from the Centaurian, they run away. And then here, I actually get a very useful magic item, the Ethereal Crossbow. So what this does is that on hit, the enemy must make a magic resistance check or take 999 damage. So it's essentially an insta-kill weapon, but unlike, say, the spell Soul Slay, which is head-targeted, it can hit limbs, which means that even if a unit fails its magic resistance check, it's still possible to survive the instant kill hit. It's very useful against certain enemy units like golems or the immobile pretender statues, just on account of the huge amount of damage that it does, and because it's a simple magic resistance check or take damage, it's not susceptible to the usual anti-insta-kill things like Mindless and so on. We find a scout, but everyone should have scouts, that's not super surprising. Here in Black Peaks, this is the Jomani's province that I have managed to besiege, and this is the huge stack of mages that Joman had managed to beat my army with earlier, but because it had already lost a fair amount of guys, and because I have a large number of mages all grouped together once again, I'm actually reasonably confident in my ability to beat it. But I do want to keep the odds stacked in my favor whenever possible, so I'm going to be returning to this province, which I had actually previously built up a large amount of province defense in, and then I'm going to be using that province defense with the same formation that I had actually showed last turn, and the province defense is going to be clustered here in the middle, which is why I've shifted my mages to the southern and far northern ends. The idea being that because the province defense is going to be clustered up over here, I want my crossbows to be over here away from the cold auras from my mages, and then the province defense is going to be over here, actually. And then that's going to be basically mingled with the single line of ghosts, but also slightly ahead and behind it, so I can keep more of my stuff on the flanks. And I can also keep my cold auras away from the living troops, which the province defense is going to bring. And then, for the most part, the rest of my attacks are also going to be continuing raiding. So we'd already seen over here that I'm having a huge amount of success against Atlantis' amphibious stuff, but he has finally brought in an army in order to start retaking those provinces. So I can expect that army to move over here, and I don't want to be in its way, so I'm just going to be moving back over here to capture some of these provinces. And again, we're not super threatened by amphibious province defense, since for the most part it actually stacks up quite poorly against ghosts. It seems that Marignon just left these Burgmeister Guard mercenaries to keep my fort besieged, but I don't need to particularly worry about the fact that the fort is under siege, since the Burgmeister Guards themselves aren't going to be breaking down the walls very quickly, and I don't need income or anything from this empty province, so I don't really need to worry about it. Instead, I'm going to try to engage this Marinese army right over here, or at least cut off this army so that if he does move it back onto the fortress, then it's going to be cut off from friendly support. This army right over here, because I haven't scouted it yet, is potentially more threatening, but it's not going to be able to move to this province directly with its because of the fact that this is a cave. So that's going to limit its movement, so unlike if it were over here and it could move these two squares, even the Mat Move 2 units will not be able to make it. The Royal Guards, because of their heavy armor, are Mat Move 1 anyways, so either way I don't need to worry about that army just suddenly reinforcing to this province right over here. So my goal by taking the fight over here is that I can potentially take on Marignon's more limited army, and if I can't, then I'll at least be able to avoid fighting this army until I've actually had a chance to scout it. Because I'm once again fighting Agartha, I'm going to just try to do a little bit of raiding across his territory. So I'm just sending a small group of ghosts right over here. It's possible that they'll be able, or that they'll die to Agartha moving his stuff up. But for now, it still has a chance of succeeding, and if it does, I'll be able to just continue attacking with what's a fundamentally expendable group of forces. This fort right over here is actually taking damage for now, because while it has a fair number of ghosts inside of it, there's even more Atlanteans besieging it. So I'm just going to summon up large numbers of packs of wolves. Again, the goal here is that because this army is starving, I just want to keep them in place. So as long as he's just moving along my forts right over here, he's not actually doing any damage to me, because I don't lose anything from having the fort besieged. By the same token, as long as I can keep him from breaching the walls, which is what the wolves are designed to do, then I can keep his army starving, continue forcing it to take more afflictions on his sacreds and so on, and then I can just raid past him. So I'm going to be sending just a small group of ghosts, again an expendable force, so that if he moves either all or some of his guys back into this province, then I don't actually lose anything of value, and then this guy is going to continue trying to raid over here, with the standard Horde of Skeleton spam plus small ghostly frontline. The idea being that if I can cut off this army's retreats, then I can just needle it and cause it to take some losses if I manage to get any of its guys to rout. Similarly, while I have managed to cause some damage to this fort, I don't plan on actually staying on it long enough to breach when I could be doing more damage by just capturing more provinces, so I'm going to be splitting up this army as well to attack additional provinces. And then, yeah, that seems to be the basic trend over here. My raiding parties right over here, because they've been continuing to take some attrition over time, are sort of starting to wind down. And then because I need to start turning more stuff towards Agartha right over here, I'm not going to be able to send quite as much north as I had been. So Mictlan gets to at least stay alive for a little bit longer, while my mage support is tied up over here down in Jomen, and over here to be able to keep my forts alive from Atlantis' push. So for the most part, I'm basically managing to maintain an advantage just by splitting up my troops more effectively than my opponents, who basically across the board have been using much larger forces than are required. Atlantis, in particular, because it has this one single big old ball right over here, just has enough guys that it's just starving to death without supply items. Agartha, similarly, by grouping up all of its guys, didn't manage to capture this province in the same turn. So while he might be sending additional guys to do that, this one big old death ball right over here just isn't covering ground as quickly as he could. Marignan, by the same token, by having only one army right over here, isn't covering a huge amount of ground, and it allows me to keep one large ball and still be able to catch it. And finally, Atlantis, again, but this time right up here, has only one group of guys, whereas I've been capturing a large number of provinces just across this territorial spread right over here. And that's the turn. This is turn 35 of Degeneracy, and I have summoned a huge number of wolves just in order to make sure that that castle will not be falling. I summon an additional Grand Lemur, because now I'm switching to the phase of the game where the large spells that they can cast is going to be more useful than just spam Shadow Blast, and because I'm now fighting at least 2 large armies in my Dominion, it's helpful to have the Immortal Mages, especially those that can cast battlefield clear spells like Wind of Death. My Pretender has been enlivening gargoyles for the last few turns, the idea being that I can actually get a lot of benefit out of flyers if my enemies have isolated mages, and because I don't have national flyers, it might be something that they're not able to see coming. As far as battles go, there really wasn't anything that's worth actually watching the fight for. It's mostly just raiding back and forth. One of my raiding parties actually fails, but this is just on account of Mictlan investing heavily in province defense. So he was actually able to predict that I was going to go for this province right over here. Mictlan's province defense, interestingly enough, has this Lord of the Deep priest in underwater provinces, because since the underwater patch, Mictlan has now national and amphibious units in Great Age. Ichthyids don't have very impressive magic resistance or morale necessarily, but they do have their morale's pretty good. That guy must have had Battle Fright or something. But they do have a large number of HP, and many of these guys have net attacks. If a net attack lands, it basically just sets enemies' defense to 0 and prevents them from moving to the next turn. Because of the HP and protection on these Ichthyiid warriors, they're able to hold the ghosts long enough for the combination of mundane spears and banishment from the priest to actually do enough damage to make my ghosts rout. So I managed to lose that raiding party just on account of Mictlan predicting my move and putting enough province defense there to beat them. Here in the Shiny Ocean, we see Mictlan's kind of a death ball, I guess you could say, of just Atlantean infantries, ice warriors, and a couple mages. So the mages themselves are none too threatening underwater. They're mostly, I assume, just being used for their leadership, because you may as well not recruit regular commanders when you can recruit mages instead. Because he's frontlining with these guys with magic weapons, I mean, the Atlantean infantries are essentially just redundant at this point. Yeah, he has no problem capturing that province. Here in Kishia, we just capture one of Mictlan's provinces. Here in Fastur, that same death ball continues to move while keeping the whole of it together. Here in Ardun, Mictlan recaptures a province with way too many dudes and only one regular priest to bless them, so probably didn't manage to get a bless on all of those. Here in Onphalia, this is one of Atlantis' province, and it seems he just forgot to put on province defense. Here, that small group of ghosts, which was intending to capture the province behind the army besieging my fort, runs into the army, so it appears as though Atlantis is withdrawing, possibly to try to get some supplies for his starving dudes. Here in Faircliff, we managed to capture a province. We lose a couple of ghosts doing it, but with Horde of Skeleton spam, we don't have any trouble taking it. Here in Valador, this is once again a large group of guys. King of Rain can cast Divine Blessing, so at least all these guys are blessed, and he has some flyers to help capture the province. Here in the Sodden Merc, once again, Skeleton Spam manages to capture a province, no trouble there. Here in Momef, we are actually capable of successfully raiding that province. It seems that it had only a scout there, and I doubt he was building a fort. It's more likely that he was just accidentally left the scout on move, or he was just recruiting. Yeah, it's just a scout recruit. Here in Renthale, Marignon actually moved his army away, so we don't manage to run into it. And here in the Black Peaks, Jomin's big ol' mage ball successfully recaptures the fort. And that's it for fights. We managed to get some free gold from an event. We lose some gold thanks to unrest building up in one of our provinces, and we get 10 death gems, which is amazing. We love getting those. Here, Marignon kept his mercenaries on the province, but given that they are about to expire, I decided to rebid them rather than try to kick them off, because I can definitely use them. Because we see that Atlantis' army is withdrawing, I'm going to simply try to capture the province with, again, just a small expendable party of ghosts. And I'm going to just be clustering up my guys right over here in preparation for a potential fight in case he does decide to let his army starve for a little bit longer. However, given that he did pull back one province, I assume that he's going to be pulling back further. I recruited this mercenary right over here, but I accidentally recruited him in a province that didn't have a lab, so I'm going to be moving him back into Friendly Dominion so that he can actually do some research for me. And then everything else is just continuing to raid, with the exception of this province right over here, where I am keeping my guys grouped up in preparation for potentially fighting Jomin's army right over here. With the combination of the province defense and all of these guys, I expect to be able to win this fight. And given that my guys are basically just sitting here because I want to be in this province for the fight, I'm just going to be having them reanimate. So it's one of the nice things about Lemuria is that when your guys aren't doing anything else, they can at least get you a couple extra troops. And I'm recruiting additional archers just because I anticipate them being useful against many of the low protection frontline units that Jomin is fielding. And then everything else is raiding game. So this guy with his boots that I'd managed to steal from one of Miklin's guys is going to just be going underwater. Because this is another crossbow province, and because I can potentially expect counter-raiding from Miklin right over here, and because it's an enemy dominion, so it'll probably stay living for a little bit, I'm going to be pumping up the province defense a lot, and recruiting some of these guys, with the idea being that they can supplement the province defense with additional crossbows, and assuming that I do manage to keep it, then I can bring over a commander to help use those crossbows to siege this fort, and potentially continue to fight Miklin's guys. The scout here is just going to be sneaking about, and yeah, I'm just continuing to raid into Atlantis' stuff, just because he has not been putting small numbers of his magic weapons guys in his provinces. I might be able to capture yet more of them for free. Here, I know that I had lost here to the earlier Ichthyid blob, but I'm trying again. The fight was close enough that I figure that I have a decent chance of doing it, and these guys are kind of stuck. Like, we've got big blobs of Miklin's guys right over here. There's no point in going over here where I can potentially run into the Atlantean army, so it's better to risk a fight that I might not win, rather than stick around and be completely useless. These guys right over here are not going to be attacking into this province right over here, where we can potentially expect Marignon to be combining his forces, but they will be moving up over here, where Marignon might run those mercenaries, or he might run this army in. Either way, they can potentially get a fight that they can win, and they'll be for sure avoiding a fight that I'm not ready to take yet. Because this attack succeeded, I'm just going to be continuing to send this raiding party deeper into Agartha's territory. Again, just trying to cause some damage with it, and it's at a minimal investment to me, given that it's just some free spawn ghosts. And the skeleton spammer over here is raiding as well. And that's the turn. This is turn 36 of Degeneracy. We once again have a ninja trying to assassinate one of my mages. This time, though, my shaman is actually able to win the fight, thanks to the fact that he was carrying a pearl for a Power of the Sphere script, and he did try to cast Mind Burn with it, and that didn't succeed, but then he cast a Vine Arrow, which managed to kill the ninja. Here we are able to capture a province with just a skeleton spammer. Here, hilariously, we managed to actually fend off what would have been an inconsequential fight if Atlantis had actually won. He has a Skull Talisman here on the Tungulik, which seems kind of useless since that guy can cast Reanimate Skeleton if you wanted to do that anyways. But because of this guy's Fear Aura, and the fact that these guys are surrounding him and all within range, he actually manages to get these guys to make an unlucky morale check and all run away. And then because that's a significant enough portion of the HP in this fight, and because some of the crossbowmen had run into range of the Centurion, then his entire army actually routs. So that's one province defense, or possibly two, I think just one, managing to rout an actual largely oversized raiding party. Here in Stone Heavens, it's again just a successful province raid, made more successful by the fact that I cost him 25 more gold by killing a scout that was recruited there. Here in Berman Highs, this is, again, just Agartha moving as a deathball, so he just has all of his guys in one place, definitely not the best. Here in Ungballath, this is my Deathball, although it's a little bit less deathly given that I have only 2 mages and just crossbows with a ghostly frontline. I'm moving these guys as a larger unit just on account of the large groups of Jaguar warriors that Mictlan has been moving around. The idea being that this is potentially enough guys to run into, maybe 50 of those guys and actually come out ahead, potentially more given that the Jaguar warriors have fared very poorly against my ghosts and crossbows. Here in the Divine Ocean, we are once again able to actually take a province, this time with skeleton spam and a very minimal ghostly frontline. Here in Alluvia, we are able to once again just raid with... this was actually the underwater province which we'd lost to earlier, but this time we had enough ghosts, including these elite Praetorian Spectres with their excellent stats. And here in... Kishia, Mictlan is able to raid one of my provinces with a large number of Jaguar warriors, and this time enough priests actually bless them. Here in Ampholia, the Burgmeister Guards rout thanks to the Fear Aura from my province defense commander, so not much to see there. Here we actually get to see Marignon's new army in action, or some of it at least. So this one has a large number of these guys, and these are scary. So Devils have a magic attack on their barbed tail, and their trident deals enough damage that if it does manage to hit through the ethereal of my ghosts, it's going to one-shot them. These guys have 2 magic attacks, both of which are relatively high damage, so these flying guys are definitely going to just rip through ghosts once they actually hit them. He has just this line of information of guys right over here, probably just in order to hold in front of enemy units. And then these guys right over here are potentially set up to summon elementals, which are again very threatening to my guys. Because these devils here at least have a heat aura of their own, and of course a large amount of fire resistance, they're not at any risk of dying to friendly fire from the fire elementals either. This guy with his pearls, I'm not 100% sure what he's going to be doing, given that he doesn't have any gems to do, or air gems to do more dangerous magic like Wind Guide or whatever. Potentially just casting, I don't know, Power of the Spheres into something. But either way, just these devils with their potential magic attacks and flying can definitely cause some damage to my guys. Additionally, they can potentially shut down a solo Grand Leader, just on account of the fact that they can fly up and kill him before he does anything nasty. Additionally, because they have a very high max age, they're going to and also fairly high magic resistance, they're much less susceptible to Winds of Death than the human troops that are supporting them. So those are definitely a very valuable addition to the army. But the army itself is still manageable, I guess. This large number of crossbows and the fact that I'm not even sure if he's casting flaming arrows for them means that I can potentially still take the fight with just having enough ghosts, rigor mortis, and other supporting magic on my side. Here in Witherlands, this isn't a super important battle, this is just further raiding into his territory, but it does show the limitations of Horde of Skeletons against ghosts, so I'll just show that real quick. So this guy's just casting, Raise Dead, which brings yet more HP on the field than Horde of Skeletons does, and then Horde of Skeletons runs out of corpses, but the Soulless are almost useless against my ghosts. They have 1 mundane attack, they have very low attack and defense, of course they can hit reliably, and they and the skeletons actually have very low magic resistance, which means that these spectral spears are liable to deal damage when they do hit. Meanwhile, their own attacks are mundane, so they're not causing damage to the ghosts particularly frequently, and this guy can even convert some of them by using Undead Command. So as a result, we're able to capture the province, and because he fatigued himself out casting those spells, given that he's just a D2 mage, he sticks around and gets killed. So he dies along with the minimal amount of province defense. Here in Shepherd's Heaven, this is Mictlan's larger stack of largely amphibious units. Pantocrator's Bounty, we're just raiding with ghosts. Lucky Lake, so this is most of that big stack that we had seen from Atlantis, so he at least split that up a little bit. Hagoria, once again, just taking on province defense. he manages to lose a bunch of these fiends, which fly ahead of his guys. And this one, I don't think I added a huge amount of province defense to. Yeah, this looks like maybe 6 or so. But because the fiends are flying in ahead of his army, they're kind of getting isolated. And while they do have very good attack and decent amount of damage, they only have 1 attack per square, and they also don't have very high protection. So when they do get hit by these guys, they can eventually get cut down. So they're enough to beat the province defense, especially even on their own, but they do take some losses doing it. And then here in Mometh, this is Agartha recapturing a province that I had raided, and he definitely has more than enough guys to do that. These guys in particular are very threatening with their large HP pools and high magic resistance, so they're definitely quite difficult to bring down. However, they are undead, so when I do go up against them with actual mage support, I can potentially convert them or just kill them with Wither Bones and similar undead clearing magic. The same is true for these whites, although even more so. These guys are actually reliant on their very high protection in order to survive, and while their HP pool is okay, it's not particularly impressive. However, they are size 2, so they have decent attack density, they do have magic weapons as well, and they have very high protection and even decent magic resistance, so they can hold up well against the ghosts themselves. Against my mage support, however, neither of these are particularly threatening compared to just, just crossbows and stuff. Here in Relothia, we are actually finally losing this province. This is one where I had actually built up all of that crossbow province defense forever ago, and it had definitely paid for itself twice over by just clearing out huge numbers of these shieldless sacreds. These guys, however, do at least have a modicum of protection from their bronze cuirasses, and while they don't have helmets and therefore are liable to continue taking pieces, he just has enough of them that they're able to get a full surround on my guys while these guys are all focused on the green warriors. And then once the Jaguar warriors get in among the crossbows, they're able to shut them down and stop them from continuing to fire on his troops. Additionally, the Rain Warriors are able to cut through the front line, so between the back line being hit and the front line being chopped to pieces by his sacreds, my forces are finally routed. Even here, even when they've lost and he manages to win through superior positioning, they still manage to cause yet more attrition, killing 18 of these expensive cap-only sacreds and 2 of these even more expensive Recruit Anywhere Jaguar warriors. So while it finally does go down, that province defense was probably one of the best investments I've made this game. Here in Old Land, we meet Atlantis' Doomstack once again on the withdrawal, so none too surprising there. And this is, oh wait, no, that's, Old Land is here. We managed to see the disease continuing to spread amongst his troops and afflictions building up, so that's always nice to watch. And these guys, as long as they're not fighting, are going to continue losing HP. While in battle, their sacred regeneration is going to help them get back up. The same is not true for these ice warriors, which are slowly dying, the ones that are diseased at least. And while not all of them are diseased, and while the Assertits are going to regain HP from their N9 Bless, they are continuing to pile up afflictions every turn until they are no longer threatening. Here in Lake Eternal, this is the other half of that large group that Atlantis had sent underwater, so he did at least finally split them up in order to take a few more provinces. Here in Faircliff, we lose a little bit of province defense, but it's not a huge investment. Here in Alluvia, we lose province income, which kind of sucks, but again, I'm not super gold dependent, so we can live. And here we get more air gems, which is nice. We can definitely spend those as well. So, given that Agartha has recaptured this province, and given that he has been extremely reticent to actually go for my forts, I'm going to try to hit this province again, since I expect that he might try to, say, move it down over here to recapture this province, or something similar to that. Because Agartha's Doomstack has been very slowly meandering up this way, it now only borders this province right over here, so I know for an almost certainty that he is going to attack me here. Additionally, because Joman has not sent his army at me, I don't think that he's going to be attacking me in this province this turn, especially given that he hasn't really reinforced it, and I've added even more ghosts to my army. Given that he's been recruiting these guys over here and additional Akaoni Samurais right over here, I expect that he's going to want to group up once again to get his Death Ball to be as big as possible before he actually takes the fight. So given that I know we're going to be fighting over here and potentially not fighting over here, I'm for sure going to take on this battle with Agartha's army. So, my formation is largely unchanged. Because I got a whole bunch of additional paralysis damage ghosts, I'm going to be moving these guys up here at the front because we want them to be taking the initial bursts from any enemy evocations such as Wither Bones, or in this case I saw that he didn't have Death Gems on his D2 mages, so most likely just Dust to Dust. Additionally, because the damage that they do is just paralysis, they are better if they're able to deal or get their hits in at the very start of the fight to potentially paralyze guys, because the actual damage that they're doing is going to be lower compared to my guys which do actual damage when they hit. So they can potentially disrupt the enemy, but are unlikely to actually kill anything on their own, so they're the most expendable, essentially. My undisciplined archers, I'm just putting at the north end. They're going to be firing automatically, so I just want them to run in, do their shooting, and I'm going to be keeping them away from the cold aura winter wolves down here. My script is otherwise largely the same. We're going to be doing some, with our D1 mage, we're going to be casting Frighten first and then switching to Dust to Dust. The reason for that is that Dust to Dust has somewhat more limited range, so these guys can potentially clear out the Long Dead, but because Dust to Dust, like most evocation, is targeted based on HP density, and because it deals armor negating damage, it's going to be fairly effective against his Iron Corpses. So we're keeping this guy at the south end of the center, essentially opposite where those Iron Corpses were placed, and then the same is true right over here. He's going to be firing a Netherbolt first because of its higher range, and then switching to Dust in order to try to clear out those Iron Corpses. Meanwhile, we'll be using anti-magic in order to increase the magic resistance of my guys against enemy banishment, and then casting out some Shadow Blasts. These guys are going to do 2 turns of Horde of Skeletons, and then casting another Shadow Blast, with a similar idea being that they're going to want to first summon up their front line, and then because of the high fatigue of Shadow Blast, this enables them to cast both Horde of Skeletons casts, which puts them up to 80 fatigue, and then cast Shadow Blast, which is going to bump them way over. The same is true for this guy right over here, in that we want the Horde of Skeletons out first to enable his guys to first move forward, but because he's the big Death Mage, he's going to be casting lots more Shadow Blasts. So at D4, he's just going to be doing a lot more damage with that and hitting a much larger area. And the same is true for Edemu. Even though he's only D3, his Shadow Blasts are going to both cost less fatigue and do more damage, so we want him to get more of those off. I'm not bothering to script these Shadow Tribunes because they're automatically going to be casting whatever spells they can, and the buff spells that they do and the control undead that they do is automatically going to be good enough. So that's the script, and then the formation itself is again largely unchanged. We have this one front line right over there. We're going to have a huge amount of province defense here, all the way up to 40, because we know that these crossbows are going to be fairly effective against whatever it is that he's using, and we just want to have as many of those as possible. Additionally, the heavy infantry front line is going to help bolster my own guys, especially since they're not going to be ghosts, and we have yet more ghostly front line in order to hit his guys. Because of my the way that my army is positioned here, this line formation here is going to be essentially mixed in with the province defense, which is all going to be clustered here in the center. So we are going to have a somewhat stronger center force of the mixed province defense and line formation ghosts, and then we'll have our auras coming in on the flanks. So that's going to be the one big fight that we're anticipating. Everything else is yet more raiding. I was able to successfully capture this province right over here, and he didn't even leave guys that border this thing right over here, although he might have some back here that I can't see. So I'm just going to continue moving up over here and potentially split once again to hit these 2 provinces, depending on where his amphibious units are. Meanwhile, this guy's going to come over here to do yet more raiding, and potentially from there either go deeper into the ocean, or potentially even go north into Agartha's territory. I'm not leaving any province defense right over here, although I should have at least left one just to, again, just kind of track what he's using. But given that I can expect him to send enough, or more than enough, to beat 1 province defense, I mean, I really should have done that just because the Lemuria Centurions can occasionally cause lucky routes, as we've already seen against Atlantis. But it's not the end of the world. It's probably not a province I'm going to be holding on to or anything. This force right over here was definitely scary, but I'm still going to try to take that fight. Because we're fighting in friendly Dominion, we're not liable to take any losses, and I just have enough ghosts that I'm willing to actually risk them fighting the crossbows and magic attack demon stuff. Also, Marignon's just been very reticent to fight me in general. He's been moving, very cautiously, so he's probably just going to be going for these provinces up over here. This is another province where I pumped up the province defense just on account of the fact that it has these crossbows, and I've recruited a couple indie crossbows as well. I don't expect that to be able to hold up against Marignon's army or anything, but if Micklin continues to send his just blocks of Jaguar warriors, they can potentially cause enough damage to be worthwhile, as we'd seen in this province right over here. Additionally, because this province right over here is the only one that's bordered by this stack of Jaguar warriors, I'm going to move up and try to intercept it. So this is, again, just a very normal composition of ghosts and crossbows that I've been using the entire game, with some apostasy spam from my prophet, and additional horde of skeletons casts and evocation from my acolytes. Netherbolt's probably not the best spell to cast, just on account of the fact that he's running a B9 Bless for his Jaguar warriors, but at least lets this guy do something when the D1 skeleton spam would probably not be super useful. And I'm additionally stacking up some province defense right over here, because these archers are actually still fairly effective against the low protection Jaguar warriors. Because I expect this stack right over here to be more likely to go underwater than onto the land province, and because this guy doesn't border any other provinces that he can attack, and my rule with raiding parties is to try to attack as much as possible, I'm going to have him try to hit this province right over here. If I guess incorrectly, I lose a little bit of death gems in the form of this acolyte right over here, but he even stands a decent chance of retreating given that he has some frontliners with him. If he doesn't, he dies, oh well, and if I guess correctly, then I managed to take another province right from underneath the feet of the army that's currently there. And this guy right over here is also raiding deeper into Atlantis' territory, where there's a very real risk that he'll be cut off. These green lines right over here are potentially scary, given that they deal magic damage in an AoE 1 with their breath weapon attack. These guys right over here can definitely potentially retake this province, and it would be very weird of him not to. And yeah, it's just a raiding game continuing going against Atlantis, with a potential to cut off one of Micklin's armies, and a large fight looming against Agartha. And that's the turn.